The world recently marked the anniversary of the death of Princess Diana. It has been 26 years this past August since the world was shocked to learn of a car accident in Paris that resulted in her sudden death at the age of 36. Princess Diana was passionate about many causes, none more so than those relating to children, and there is one charity that bears the princess's name, the Diana Award. I'm joined by their Chief Executive Officer of the Diana Award, Tessy Ojo. Tessy, welcome and thank you for joining this iteration of the Swift Hour.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Well, so you've just come into New York. You're here for Concordia. You're here for the United Nations General Assembly Week. You have an important day tomorrow with Prince William. Talk about this week and why you've come.
So, firstly, thank you so much for having me. This is my first Concordia Summit, so it's amazing, and it's amazing to do it in such an important week. This week, I think that if we can project 10 years' time, there's so many decisions that are being made this week that will change the trajectory of communities, of people, and of places for good or for bad. And I think that this week really helps us think about that power. What does that mean? Who is on the table? Who are the people making those decisions that will change lives? And whose lives will they change? When I think about the future, I think about in 50 years' time, what will be the consequences of decisions being made this week? And who will bear the consequences of those? Who's going to be here in 50 years' time to see the repercussion, good or bad? And are those people part of those conversations? I think when you think about it in the stack reality, it's shocking because I know the reality is that most 20-somethings, under 20-somethings are not part of that dialogue. And actually they should be, because in 50 years' time, they will be here, whereas most people who are sat on the table right now are probably not going to be here in 50 years' time. And so whilst this is a really important week to really talk about those big issues, I want to give my voice to ensure that actually whilst we're talking about these big issues, there are people being left behind. There are people who are not sat on the table right now who should be. And I hope that when the leaders go home and when things have been drafted, that if they take one thing away from my voice or from the voices of lots of people this week, is actually you should not be making decisions about the future when you're probably not going to be part of that future, and those who would leave that future should really be on the table.
When you think about what's happening in the world today, I talked this morning when opening the summit about there's a feeling in so many ways that there's almost more to be pessimistic about than there is to be optimistic about. However, we're also seeing younger people being so much more involved in civil society, so many more younger people being involved in politics. So how do you bridge that difference of the world as portrayed in our newspapers and news channels versus what you're seeing on the front line?
Both are absolutely true. We are in a dire place as a world. Everything that we know, I think, if anything, the pandemic was a real revelation about our systems are broken. The world that we live in is broken. And actually, when it comes to building back better, we need to think about what does that mean? How can we build back better? So that's the reality of the world that we live in, that there's very little. If I didn't have the view of the young people that I have, there's very little to be hopeful about, because also there is a breakdown in the leadership that we have, elected leadership across the world. There is a huge disconnect between actually who are the leaders serving. When it comes to the younger generation, they do not feel served. They do not feel that the leadership that we have, the elected leadership across the world, actually represent them or understand them. And so we almost live in this parallel world where actually young people are saying, I'm tired of being on the sideline. I'm going to get involved. Because actually these people are not representing me anymore. So I'm going to get involved. The truth is that there's two sets of young people. There's the young person who says, I'm just going to do something about it. But there are thousands more who are being left behind, who understand, who live in this bubble of no one knows my plight, no one hears me, and yet I feel powerless. And I think for me, I applaud those young people who are joining the movement, who understand that they have power. Like Princess Diana 100% believed that young people have power to change the world. Yet she also knew that they cannot do that if they're not supported. And I want to be on the side of those who don't know that they have power but yet have. And how can we build their capacity? How can we help shift the dial? And how can we create this how can we bridge this gap where actually we're saying to leaders, let's create a world, let's build back better. That's the critical thing. We have to build back. We have to the systems, like I said, the systems that we have now just do not work. How can we build back better? And the way to build back better is to get everyone on the table, get young people, get that movement going, shift the power so that the power doesn't sit with just a few, but actually the power is spread out so that, I say to young people, look, if you live in a rural part of the world, wherever you live, and there's no library, rather than wait for some local government or some local authority to help build a library for you, start a book club with your friends. And that's shifting power. You're saying to you, take the power yourself, start a book club. Because in starting a book club, you're swapping books, which is the point of a library. And suddenly you're moving, people feel that there's something happening. And that takes investment, that takes being listened to, that takes being supported for young people to say, actually, I can do that. And you see that little systems change begins to create something where people begin to feel hopeful, because where there is no hope, there is no tomorrow. And the biggest thing we find, and I find that a lot with crime or with mental health crises, is where people feel that there's no hope, where people feel that there's no future. They don't care about tomorrow. They will do whatever. They don't care. Why should I preserve a home if if I'm not going to be here? I'll destroy it. When you think, and so a lot of the time we think about the crime that's happening, and we think, oh, well, let's build more prisons, let's do X. But actually, why? Why are people feeling the need not to look after their environment? Because they don't see themselves being there tomorrow. It's that absolute lack of hope, and that's dire.
You mentioned Princess Diana, and I want to reflect a little bit at the fact that the Diana Award is the only charity that is from her namesake, and so talk a little bit about. First, I would love to better understand. Talk about the award itself, and then let's talk about some of the different initiatives around bullying, around mental health that you have. But first, describe to me what the Diana Award is.
So the Diana Award is, like you said, the only charity across the world that continues her legacy. And her legacy really is about young people. She, one of the things that I love is, I think at her 25th or 28th memorial, a statue was created for her at her home in Kensington Palace. And actually, what I loved, and her sons asked people, created a committee to look into it. What I loved about that statue is she was placed among 3 or 4 children, and the children were created in such a way that there was no ethnicity. You couldn't tell. They were just global children, and I love that because that was her. She, to me, was one of the first people who understood the balance between privilege and responsibility, and how actually your privilege is not for you only. You're meant to use that to shine a light on other people. And that was not part of the script, but she rewrote the script so that she used her privilege, her crown, to shed a spotlight on issues that affected others, people that society didn't really talk about. I mean, the thought that even so many years ago, we thought that just by touching someone who had HIV, we would suddenly get HIV is shocking. But that was a belief system at the time, and she rewrote the script. So her legacy has to be one that is forward-looking, one that goes where the pain is, one that's unafraid to go to territories where other people are probably too scared to do. And that's the boldness of the legacy. So I our charity is very focused on young people. It's all about driving change for young people, but it's pretty much about going where the pain is for young people. And the way we do that is we take a snapshot every 5 years. We think we huge consultation with young people. We couldn't possibly do this without making sure that young people are at the heart of everything, at the center of everything that we do. But we take a snapshot on where the pain is for young people every 5 years, and for those 5 years we focus on those areas, and then another 5 years. And sometimes we don't. Does the fact that 5 years time doesn't mean that we're going to drop all that. If young people say, "Hey, stay here," because that's still relevant, we do. And so that's kind of pretty much how we work. And at the moment, our 5-year strategy looks at 3 thematic areas: mental health, social and economic barriers, and youth leadership. So yeah, so those 3 areas means, for example, with mental health, we look at the broadest. We look right from what does it mean? What are the triggers? What are the causes? And we look at relationship breakdown. So when you ask about bullying, that's where that comes in, because we know that when young people's relationship breaks down, sometimes what it translates at is bullying in the school, in the playground, or bullying online. But we also look at how do we prevent, and what does the advocacy look like. So for every thematic area, we take a 3-pronged approach: preventive, intervention, and advocacy. Because we make sure that what we're learning, how do we take the practice that we're learning, how do we use that to inform change in policy and creating a better environment for young people to thrive. Because if we're going to shift the dial on those 3 thematic areas, then we need to look at the entire ecosystem and making sure that it's safe for the young person.
How do you balance the tools and the technology that have emerged that in so many ways can be a tool of empowerment, but at the same time can also be a tool for driving more mental health issues or for loneliness? Talk about social media specifically, because you know, young people want to have more of a voice. Well, we all have the ability to have social media profiles, and to there's a number of political movements that have been completely started and effective because of their use of social media. But at the same time, it's posed a real challenge to people's mental health. So how do you navigate that balance?
I get asked that question a lot, particularly by parent groups, and to say, "Oh God, social media is detrimental to our child's health or mental health, and what do we do about it?" And my response is this: look, anything can be detrimental. It's how you balance the use. So, for example, I would often say social media has this huge benefit. Like you said, it's giving young people a voice, where, particularly in an age where they're not listened to, it gives them a platform to have a say. But yes, we know that everything that we have, it's about moderation. How do I use that well? How do I balance the right? And this is why it comes back to the ecosystem. Where if your only outlet is social media, if that child has no friends in real life, then let's look at that. There's something wrong. And this comes back to that entire ecosystem, as parents, as educators, as tech people, the ISPs and the social media providers. How do we ensure that actually, what is that child's usage like? How are we making sure that this person is not spending 18 hours of the day online? That's a flag, right? Because there's no way you should be spending 18 hours of your day online. That's a flag. But also, what is the parental responsibility? If your child has 5,000 friends on Facebook, or, well, most kids don't use Facebook, probably on Instagram, yet they're never invited to any school parties, they never go anywhere else, they're never invited to the cinema with friends, that's a flag. And it's really about that education and working to get that intersectionality. How do we make sure, young people are fairly savvy when it comes to socials. They understand that this whole glamorous world, like there's the Instagram versus reality. And it's like, how do we ensure that as parents? I remember when my kids went onto socials, my kids are a lot older, when they started socials, we always had conversations. At the end of the week, we would have things like, what's trending on Instagram? What are the challenges? Let's do it together, or let's talk about it. There was one time, this is many years ago, there was something very, very unsafe. There was something was going viral on socials and it was really very unsafe. I think kids were asked to maybe jump out of a moving car and do a dance and film it. Now that's very unsafe. What I did with my kids was constantly sit down, let's discuss it. What makes this unsafe? Actually, this might be cool to film, but what if you died? And so this is where sometimes I often find challenge parents. You cannot, the same way as a parent, you teach your child to ride the bicycle for the first time. You go out, you don't buy a bike and say, go and do it yourself. When you take your child swimming, you don't dump your child in the pool and say, learn yourself. Why do we as parents or adults, why do we buy this whole gadget for our child and say, hey, explore yourself? And we don't sit and have conversations. And yet we blame the social platform. Now, I'm not saying social media hasn't got responsibilities, but I'm saying we cannot simply abdicate our responsibilities and constantly point the fingers. No, it's about collective responsibility to make sure that we are breeding and raising healthy children who have a healthy balance of using everything right.
I've thought a lot about this in terms of this. There was a recent book that just came out about happiness. And there seems to be this belief of younger people, I find, that happiness is something that is guaranteed. That if you have a bad day, you're guaranteed every day is supposed to be a great day. And happiness is something that needs to come from others in your life rather than from within oneself. So how do you approach happiness from the Diana Ward and with the young people that you work with? And perhaps maybe some false expectations about how things work in life.
100%. I think it's important to always, like you said, it's the real, keeping it real with young people. For example, we will say to young people, have your say, but it's not, we're not saying we're going to do everything you say, because the reality is that we cannot do everything. And there's always that check and balance, keeping it real, because that's what they want. The young people at the summit this morning talks about accountability. They're not expecting us to do everything. They just want to be spoken to be told, and they want some degree of accountability. I think that sadly we live in a world, generally, society is such that there's certain values, and there's certain values that I perhaps in my generation I grew up with. Things that you're not told these days, like delayed gratification. Everything is not instant. You have to, patience, for example, empathy. Those are not values that are talked about in today's world. And that's in turn then begins to breed this, I want it now, I need to get it now. If I don't get it now, there's something fundamentally wrong. Oh, woe is me, I'm in trouble. And again, when you work with young people, part of it is, let's talk about resilience. What does that mean? Resilience means I will fall, but it's how quickly am I able to bounce back? How do I have the right tools? Stuff would happen, and that's real. And so it's how do we build resilience? And that's what, fundamentally, every part of our work, we talk about resilience, but mental resilience, intellectual resilience. How do we instill that into all of our work so that young people have the tools to bounce back? Because life happens. We do not have control of everything. Stuff happens. Okay, I did an exam. I had a bad day in my test today. I failed it. How do we bounce back? But it's also acknowledging that, damn, I kind of failed that one, but I can bounce back. But it's also about talking to others, having a support. We always talk about the high fives. This is young people speak. Yep. Find your high five. Find people in your life that you can always talk to based on whatever's happening. Always have a high five, because that's critical to your ability to bounce back.
And something that, frankly, you need to remind people, because the kid that has 5,000 friends, they don't have 5,000 friends. I mean, I've always thought that was one of the things that makes social media a bit tricky. Talk about you for a minute. When you were younger and just getting started in your career, are you doing what you thought you'd be doing?
Oh, that's a really good question. So, do you know what? I think that, yes, but I didn't think I'd be doing it this way. And I'll tell you why. So, I am a child of an ambassador. So I grew up with pretty impressive privilege. But the kind of privilege that 8-year-old Tessy hated it. because 8-year-old Tessy did not understand. I remember once asking my dad, I'm one of 7 children. And the protocol when you are a child of a diplomat is that, and I think the letter was different. The way the letter was interpreted was extreme. So the letter is meant to be for safety, do not travel in the same car. The way it was interpreted meant that even myself and my siblings never ever went in the same car, ever, ever, ever. Now at 8-year-old, when you're 8, that's annoying.
Yeah.
And I remember saying to my dad, this is rubbish. I hate this. And he goes, but that's part of the privilege. I'm like, I don't want this. I didn't work for it. Anyway, cut the long story short. But that began to ignite in me because I also realized that what was meant to be a great privilege, I looked around me and not everyone lived the way that I lived. And that was annoying as well. Why did people not even have some basics? And yet I have all this fleet of cars always parked in the driveway when some people just walked to school. And so there was this beginning rising in me about the inequality in the world. Translate that a few years later, at the age of 13, I found out that we moved countries. That was what diplomats did. I met a girl, and for the first time in my life, I realized that her brother had an illness I had never heard of in my entire life. It was sickle cell anemia. I also found out that it was not curable. But for 13 or 14-year-old Tessy, who was pretty academic and pretty smart, the fact that I had never heard about this made me realize that, great, this is something that affected only a certain demography of people, therefore there was no investment, and therefore nothing was being done about it. And that made me decide that I was going to become a doctor. And the reason was because I wanted to be the first person that found the cure to sickle cell anemia. Fast forward many years later, I realized that actually I studied, someone said to me, if you want to really do that, then you need to be a scientist, not a doctor. You need to study sciences. So I thought, okay, my first degree, I went off to study biochemistry. Got my first job as a biochemist and I absolutely hated it. And I didn't hate the academic part of it. I hated that I didn't work with people. I was working with people like me, well, people who didn't like to talk a lot, people who just walked. And that's when I began to think, oh my goodness, I've spent all of my life dreaming of this thing, and yet I hate it. But that led me onto a new journey when I actually realized that what I wanted to do was bring solutions to people. I wanted to work with people and unpick solutions and be a voice, be an advocate for change in that sense, whether it was through tackling the health inequality of sickle cell anemia or tackling any other form of inequality. I knew that deep inside of me, that was the thing that drove me. And so when you ask me that, am I doing the job that I wanted to do from the get-go? Yes. I didn't think it was going to be in this format, but I am driven by the need for change. That's what drives me. That's what keeps me awake at night. But also that's what makes me go to bed happy. That I've made one change and that makes me happy.
And you took what was a challenge and turned it into an opportunity. Tessy, thank you so much for joining, and it's great to see you, and congratulations on all the important work you're doing on the front lines.
Thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed this.